Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I share my top tips as well as mistakes to avoid when overwintering plants. So let's go. I've been overwintering lots of different plants for a number of years. I really enjoy the process, but more than anything, it saves a lot of money for me when it comes to gardening. I'm currently sitting in my unheated garage, which is attached to my house. This is the number one place where I love to overwinter plants. The second place that I like to overwinter plants is in my unheated basement. I have a number of videos on my channel that talk about different ways to overwinter a variety of plants. What I'll do is put a link to it down below as well as up above. While I'm chatting with you today, I'm just going to be cleaning up a number of bare root pelargoniums or geraniums. The tips that I'm going to be sharing with you today are in no specific order. Also, the tips are meant to be at a very high level. They're not meant to be specific for each individual plant. Experiment. Not only is gardening one big experiment, but overwintering plants can also be one big experiment. In fact, every year I experiment with different plants and see what works and what doesn't work. And when it comes to experimenting, I try not to give up the first year. In other words, if I'm trying to overwinter a specific plant and I'm not successful with it, I usually will try to overwinter it again a different way. And what I mean by that is maybe I gave that plant too much water and it died. So I might try to overwinter it a second year and not give it as much water and see how that plant fares. So if you go into the whole process of overwintering some sort of a plant and it doesn't work for you, the way that you should look at it is, well, it was worth the try. You had nothing to lose, but you had a lot to gain. And I get it that sometimes when we're trying to overwinter a plant, it might be for sentimental reasons. Maybe it was a plant that you got from a loved one and you want that plant to survive. Just know that overwintering plants is not always an easy process. So there is a bit of a learning curve, and as long as your expectations are not too high, then you'll be fine, and you have, like I said, you have nothing to lose, but you have a lot to gain. Water. This is probably the most important thing I'm going to share with you when it comes to overwintering your plants. Many times, plants that you're overwintering are trying to go to sleep for the winter. In other words, they want to go dormant. And dormant doesn't necessarily mean that the plant is going to look 100% dead. It's more that the plant needs a period of rest. And during that period of rest, the plant's water requirements go down drastically. So if you give a dormant or overwintering plant too much water, you might as well just kill the plant right then and there. And I don't mean to be harsh. It's just a statement. It's a true statement that overwatering a plant will most likely kill the plant. But on the flip side, if you neglect to check on that plant and you don't give it any water at all, that also can kill the plant. You want the plant to basically be limping along. You want to keep it alive, but you don't want to kill it by giving it too much water. You don't want to kill it by giving it too little water. So as a general rule of thumb, I usually water my potted overwintering plants about once a month because different plants will require a different amount of water. Generally, I like to take my finger and sink it in about 1 to 2 inches in the pot that the plant is in. And if at that level the soil feels dry, I give that plant the smallest drink of water. And generally, the larger the pot that the overwintering plant is in, the more water it will need. The smaller the pot, the less water it will need. But the key indicator is not just looking at the color of the soil, because a lot of times the color of the soil will be light brown if the plant needs water. But also by taking your finger and putting it in the soil a couple of inches deep, about 1 to 2 inches deep, and if that soil feels dry, then give that plant a small drink of water. When you have a potted plant outside during the summer months, you usually try to water it until you see the water draining from the bottom of the pot. You don't need to follow that same rule when you're overwintering a plant indoors. You just are giving that plant a small drink of water and that's it. But with that said, it is important to make sure that all your plants that you're overwintering have drainage holes in the bottom of them. Just in case, for whatever reason, if you gave a potted plant too much water, you still want the water to be able to drain out. Light. Depending on the plant that you're trying to overwinter will determine the light requirements or how much light that plant needs while it's overwintering. Here where I'm sitting in my garage, I do have some windows, but not many. So whatever light that the plants are getting is a very filtered light. It is not necessary for any of the plants that I'm trying to overwinter to be in any sort of direct light. In fact, I believe that if many of the plants that I'm overwintering were in darkness, that they would be fine. They are dormant and they are asleep. I've never put any sort of grow lights on the plants that I'm overwintering in my garage. You can if you want to, but just know that it depends on the plant that you're trying to overwinter, and also know that it's usually not necessary. Some people do like to overwinter their plants indoors, and based on those indoor plants, the requirements will also change. Those plants may need more water. Those plants may need more light. But for me, the two places where I'm overwintering my plants, in my garage or in my basement, I don't have any sort of supplemental lights, and my plants are not right next to any bright window. Temperature. My unheated garage during the coldest parts of the winter, which are usually January or February, typically doesn't drop down below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Depending on the plant that you're trying to overwinter, you'll want to do your research, but as a general rule of thumb, plants that are asleep, that are dormant, that you're trying to overwinter, are happy when the temperatures are on the cooler side. Not freezing, but definitely cooler. Somewhere between 40 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's, again, for dormant plants, plants that are either in a garage, a cellar, a basement. But if you have plants that are indoors, those plants are generally not dormant. In other words, they are awake, they're alive, they're going to need not only more light, not only more water, they're also going to need a warmer temperature. When you think about it, these dormant plants, you don't want them actively growing. And that's the reason why you basically slow down on all the things that those plants generally need when they're actively growing, let's say during the summer months. You don't want to be babying and tending to these plants months on end, or maybe you do, and that's why you bring them inside. I don't want to keep my plants awake. I want them to go to sleep. I don't want to take care of them too much. I want to just basically let them get a rest for the winter while I get a rest for the winter. Pests. When you try to overwinter a plant, it is very important to check for pests. Not only pests, but disease as well. You definitely don't want to be overwintering a diseased plant. And when you're checking your plant over for pests, and pests could be all sorts of pests, there's a whole list of them out there. But if, let's just say it's aphids or spider mites, something like that, you want to check your plants over very carefully. You want to inspect them for any pests, because pests are not welcome when you're trying to overwinter a plant. Some people will treat their plants by spraying the tops and the bottoms of the leaves with water. Other people will change the soil. The plants that I'm overwintering in my garage, I rarely change the soil. And if I ever did change the soil, it's only because I'm taking a very large potted plant and I'm moving it into a smaller pot for the winter. But even then, I usually reuse potting mix. I don't just use new potting mix. For the plants that I overwinter in my garage, I've never treated them for pests, and I've never had an issue. But if I did find I had an infestation of pests, I would definitely handle that issue right away. Disease. We already talked about not bringing plants in that have any sort of disease. But also, when it comes to these plants that you are overwintering, many times they're going to start to drop their leaves. And when they start dropping their leaves, it's very important to be collecting those leaves and disposing of them. You don't want dead leaf material sitting at the base of your plants for a long period of time, because that can also cause disease and spread to that plant. And that's very natural for an overwintering plant to drop its leaves. It just is going to sleep for the winter, and it is going in a state of dormancy. And one of the ways that it does that is by dropping its leaves. Now, I don't go out every single day and check each one of my plants and look for one leaf that has dropped. It's okay to only check your overwintered plants, let's say once a month or so. And during that once a month check, you're checking for a bunch of things. One of them is the moisture level that we talked about. And another thing is for any sort of pests or diseases that we've also talked about. And that includes any of these leaves that have fallen and disposing of them. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now. These geraniums that we're overwintering, there are a number of leaves on here that are looking pretty crispy. They don't look very good. So at this time, I'm just removing those leaves. Fertilizer. Dormant plants definitely do not need fertilizer. You're not trying to wake up your plants. You're trying to tell your plants to go to sleep, which is why you're reducing the amount of water that you're giving them, which is why they're starting to drop their leaves. You also definitely do not want to be giving them fertilizer because that tells the plant it's time to wake up. However, in late winter, early spring, when it is time to wake up your plants, you will increase the amount of light, you will increase the temperature, you will increase the amount of water that the plant will start to need. And then once the plant has really started to wake up, you at that time can go ahead and start fertilizing your plants like you normally would. Neglect. Make sure not to neglect or forget about your overwintered plants. It's so easy to do, especially if you have your plants in your basement or in your garage. It's almost like out of sight, out of mind. The problem is by neglecting your plants, it can cause a lot of problems. There could be disease that takes over or pests that take over. The plants will not get enough water and will dry out and die. So just be mindful of that and put it on your calendar if you need to. In fact, that's what I usually do. I put it on a calendar on my phone to just check on my plants once a month. When you're overwintering plants indoors in a sunny window or under grow lights, it's a lot easier to not forget about them because they're right there and in plain sight. You see them all the time. But these plants that are in your garage or basement, for example, like dahlias, let's say, you really should be giving them a little drink of water during the winter months, especially if they're seeming very dry. If you don't do that, they're going to start to shrivel up. And if they shrivel up too much, it's very hard to get them to come back. These bare root geraniums, you could possibly go the whole winter and not give the roots a drink of water, and the geraniums may be fine. But what I like to do is check on these geraniums once a month. And during that monthly check-in, I'm not only checking over for leaves that need to be pulled off, but I'm also giving the plant a little bit of water. And in that case, I'm just soaking these roots for a few hours once a month. And that's all the plant really needs. So do whatever you have to do to not neglect your plant and to make sure that you're checking on your plants about once a month during the winter months. I hope you found this video helpful. Those are my main tips on what to do when it comes to checking in on overwintered plants. I have a lot of videos on my channel that show my process for overwintering lots of different plants like geraniums, canna lilies, calla lilies, dahlias, and many other plants. What I'll do is put a link to that playlist down below. If you have any questions or comments, I love hearing from you. Please drop them down in the comment section. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.